Morning arrived without asking permission. The first light reached for the shutters, slipped through the thin slats, and painted the room in pale bars of gold. Kevin woke to the soft creak of leather and the quiet, measured sound of buckles being fastened. Dito stood by the dresser in uniform, the dark fabric catching the light along its seams, his posture already straighter, already a little farther away. "Don't move," Kevin said, voice sleep-rough. "Give me 1 minute of pretending." Dito, hands stilled at his belt. "You can have 2. Kevin sat up, the sheet falling to his waist, the cool air kissing warm skin where Dito's arm had lain only hours before. He reached for him without thinking, fingers brushing the back of Dito's knuckles. That was all it took. Dito turned, and the soldier softened into the man-eyes that always found him first. Shoulders that lowered a fraction, as if the weight redistributed at Kevin's touch. "Come here," Kevin murmured. "Dito." Kevin stood, stepped into the space beneath his chin, and pressed his forehead to the center of Dito's chest, letting the slow, even thrum of his heartbeat fill his ear. He smoothed the palm over the crisp front of the uniform, then slid higher to the collar to straighten what wasn't crooked, dust what wasn't dusty, do something with his hands that he could bear. "You smell like oil and starch," Kevin said, half a smile, half a wound. "And river water," Dito answered. "You forgot the river." Kevin closed his eyes. "I didn't." They dressed the silence together, Kevin buttoning the last button because it made his fingers shake less, Dito tying his scarf and then untying it so Kevin could redo it slower. Dito slipped a small, worn tag from beneath his collar and pressed it into Kevin's palm dog, tag edges dulled by time, the chain cool as it coiled between fingers. "Hold it for me," he said, "so I remember where to come back." Kevin's thumb ran over the stamped letters, the curve of metal. "You were always going to come back here. Now I have no excuse," Dito said. They moved through the house in a ritual of touch, Kevin's hand at Dito's wrist as they passed the kitchen, Dito's palm at the small of Kevin's back as they stepped through the doorway. The brief, quiet press of a shoulder to shoulder when neither could think what to say that wouldn't crack them open. Outside, the hill was washed in morning. The path to the village was still damp, the earth dark and smelling of last night's dew. Banana leaves lifted and tilted in the early breeze. Sparrows stitched quick songs through the air. They walked close. Kevin let his arm brush Dito's with each step, then stopped pretending it was an accident and slid his fingers into Dito's hand. Dito's grip tightened once firm, telling before he eased it to a hold that could look like nothing at all if anyone happened to look. The village felt suspended. Women at wells paused their work. A child with a kite tucked the string into his pocket and watched. 2 elders bent over a game of stones without moving a piece. The old woman from the fruit stall stood by her table, hands folded, mouth a thin line of blessing or warning. The air carried the faint iron smell of tools being mended and the sweetness of something frying in oil. Life continued, but on mute. At the edge of the square, a cart waited for the men heading out. No drums, no speeches, only a wooden plank laid across the back for sitting and a horse with a patient, indifferent eye. Dito stopped a few paces short. Kevin felt him gather himself the way a wave gathers before it breaks. "Kevin," Dito said, and the name was a quiet prayer. "Wait." Kevin stepped closer until there was no space left but breath. He lifted a hand and smoothed it over Dito's jaw, feeling the rasp of morning stubble under his palm. He mapped the cheekbone, traced the familiar slope to the ear, the notch of a scar at the hairline only he ever seemed to notice. "Hold still. I'm going to keep all of this." Dito's eyes softened. "Take more." Kevin did. He set his other hand at Dito's waist and tugged gently, fitting them flush, hip to hip. He laid his cheek along Dito's temple for a heartbeat, then another, breathing in the faint smoke tangled in Dito's hair, the clean bite of soap at his collar. When he leaned back, Dito's hands had already found the lines of his ribs and settled there, thumbs moving in slow, unconscious passes, soothing, memorizing, refusing to memorize because it meant agreeing to part. A boy ran by with a cowbell, the brief clang startling both of them back a half-inch. Dito huffed a laugh that wasn't a laugh. Kevin raised his chin just slightly, and Dito understood. He lowered his mouth in a public kiss that wasn't a kiss, lips resting against Kevin's for the length of a breath. No movement, only the tremor of held-in motion. It was careful. It told the truth anyway. "People will talk," Kevin whispered, not moving away. "Let them," Dito said. "If they speak your name and mine in the same air, I am still here." The old woman from the stall came forward then, a mango tucked in the crook of her arm, a string of jasmine circling her wrist. She didn't look at their mouths. She didn't need to. She touched Dito's sleeve, then Kevin's shoulder, the petals brushing skin. "Come back with both your hands," she said to Dito. To Kevin, "Keep the light on." Kevin nodded. He would. He had already decided to keep it on, even in the morning. The cart creaked. A sergeant called names. Dito's gaze flicked toward the sound, then back to Kevin as if deciding which summons carried more authority. He swallowed, and Kevin watched his throat move. It looked like a decision made by a single muscle, a single inch. "Walk me to the cart," Dito said. Kevin did. Their arms pressed so close that if one stumbled, the other would have no choice but to fall with him. At the step, Dito turned and set his forehead against Kevin's, an old habit that still stole breath. Their noses brushed. Kevin's eyes shut of their own accord. "Say it once," Kevin murmured, not trusting his voice past a whisper. "Always." The word vibrated where their skin met. Dito eased back half an inch. "Always." Kevin nodded, because if he spoke, everything would spill out. He lifted Dito's hand without asking and pressed his lips to the center of the palm, one heartbeat. Two then turned that hand and set the same kiss in the warm crease of the wrist where pulse met thumb. Dito shivered as if the air had changed. Temperature. "Remember the way home," Kevin said. Dito's mouth curved, a shape like bravery. "You're holding it in your hand." His gaze dropped to the chain peeking from Kevin's fist. He closed Kevin's fingers around the tag. "Keep it warm." Dito stepped up into the cart. The boards complained under his weight. He sat, squared his shoulders, and became the version of himself that belonged to other men, steady, certain, carrying a map in his head no one else could see. He lifted a hand, small motion, the kind you make at a station window when the glass is thick and you don't trust your face. Kevin refused to shrink the gesture. He lifted both of his. One held the chain. The other was empty and open. The cart started with a jolt. The horse tossed its head, and the wheels found their groove in the ruts of the square. Dito didn't look away. Kevin stepped forward without thinking, as if he could keep up with wood and iron and duty if he walked quickly enough. He matched 3 rolling steps before the distance one. He stopped. He swallowed. He stood there, palms cooling, watching the cart become smaller than a house, smaller than a gate, a dark block moving toward the road that bent behind the mango trees and out of view. He didn't wave again. He didn't cry. He placed the tag chain around his own neck, the metal settling with a soft, certain weight against his sternum, and stayed where the dust hadn't settled yet. He stood long enough for the echoes to flee hoof wheel. Muted Calland, only then let himself breathe the next breath all the way in. Behind him, the old woman set the mango on his porch step like a charm. Somewhere, the boy with the cowbell found a rhythm and turned it into a tune. The village resumed its morning, one small sound at a time. As if someone were lifting a blanket very slowly off a sleeping body. Kevin turned toward the path home. The sun had climbed higher. The hill wore it like a shawl. He pressed his palm flat against his chest, covering the cool circle of metal beneath his shirt, and felt his own heart knocking there stubborn steady, refusing to obey anything but itself. "Always," he said to the quiet, testing the word the way you test a bridge with your foot. The bridge held. He started walking. The village quieted quickly after Dito's departure. But for Kevin, silence didn't mean peace. It meant absence. When he stepped back into the house, the air felt different, emptier, thinner, as though the walls had lost their anchor. The living room still held the smell of leather and starch from Dito's uniform, faint but clinging. Kevin paused by the doorway, one hand on the wood, unable to make himself move deeper inside. He wandered slowly through the rooms, touching everything Dito had brushed against that morning. The chair where he had tied his boots, the edge of the table where he had set his scarf, the counter in the kitchen where Kevin's hand still remembered the warmth of being lifted onto it, of Dito's mouth against his in-between sips of tea. Each place felt like a ghost pressed into wood and air. On the bed, Kevin found the shirt Dito had left behind rumpled, smelling faintly of soap, sweat, and the clean scent of river water. He sat down heavily, clutching it to his chest, pressing his face into the fabric until his breath hitched. The chain around his neck felt heavier than ever, the metal cool against his skin. The day stretched long. Kevin tried to keep busy sweeping the porch, rinsing the basin, even peeling fruit, but every task carried memory. His hand reached for where Ditto would usually steady the bucket. His shoulder twitched at the absence of Dito's laugh echoing behind him. When night fell, the silence deepened. The bed felt too wide, the sheets too cold. Kevin curled onto his side, clutching the pillow Ditto had used, breathing in the fading warmth as if it might last until morning. His fingers traced the chain at his throat until his skin grew tender. He whispered into the darkness, words that trembled out without permission. Always, come back to me. But the room did not answer, and the quiet pressed down heavier than sleep. The first days without Ditto moved like molasses low, heavy, almost painful in their stillness. Kevin filled them with small motions, but the quiet pressed too hard against him. He found himself sitting at the desk in their bedroom, the same place he had once scribbled secret letters that were never sent. Now, the habit returned, heavier than before. The journal lay open, its pages soft from use, the ink smudged where he had pressed too hard or lingered too long. Kevin dipped the pen, hesitating, his hand trembling over the page. Then, with a breath, the words began to spill. Dear Ditto, the silence here has weight. It sits in my chest where your voice used to be. The house remembers you. Your shirt still smells like the river. The porch still waits for your footsteps. I sleep pressed against your pillow, though it no longer carries your warmth. If I close my eyes hard enough, I almost believe you're beside me. Almost. He paused, pressing the nib harder until it bled a small dark blot into the paper. His fingers clenched. He closed his eyes, whispered aloud what he couldn't bear to write. Come back to me. Day after day, Kevin repeated the ritual. Sometimes, the letters were short, only a sentence or two. Nothing but I miss you written over and over until the page blurred. Other times they poured out, full of longing, anger, and aching tenderness. He sent some of them, folding them carefully, and handing them to traders who promised they'd find their way to the camps. But others he hid beneath the mattress, folded into tight squares, too raw to let anyone else see. Weeks passed before a reply came. The envelope was smudged with dirt, the handwriting clipped, and careful military hands, censored eyes. Kevin tore it open with shaking fingers. Alive. Well, cannot say more. Hold on to me in your thoughts. Always deed. The letter was brief, barely a handful of words. Yet Kevin pressed it to his chest as if it could warm the hollow inside him. He kissed the ink where Ditto had signed, whispering against it. Always, I'll hold on. That night, he wrote again, his hands steadier, his heart beating harder. Dear Ditto, your words reached me. They were short, but they were you. I kissed the paper, and for a moment it felt like kissing you. If you ever wonder where home is, remember this: my arms, this house, the mango tree, the river, they all wait for you. I wait for you. When he set the pen down, Kevin didn't weep. Instead, he ran his fingers along the chain around his neck, pressing the dog tag flat against his skin, and breathed deep, slow, steady, as if syncing his breath with the rhythm of a heartbeat far away. The days that followed brought no battles to Kevin's door, but the war found its way into his ears. At the market, voices hushed when he passed. Traders spoke of soldiers injured, of caravans halted, of units lost somewhere beyond the hills. No names, never names, but enough to make Kevin's skin prickle. He pretended to inspect baskets of turmeric, jars of dried chilies, but his heart beat harder with every whisper that slipped through the cracks. Sometimes, he caught the villagers, watching him. The glances weren't cruel, they were weighted with pity, with knowledge, as if they already knew what it meant to be left behind, as if they saw in him the outline of grief that hadn't yet arrived. Some neighbors offered half smiles that didn't reach their eyes. Others avoided him altogether, as though his silence carried contagion. One evening, on his way back from the well, a neighbor stopped him. The man's voice was quiet, almost gentle. Prepare yourself, he said, not meeting Kevin's gaze. News doesn't travel fast, but when it does, it's often too late. Then he walked on, leaving Kevin with the weight of words heavier than any bucket of water. Kevin returned to the house in silence. He sat on the porch steps, the dog tag cool against his skin, his thumb rubbing the letters until they grew warm. His mind replayed every rumor, every whisper, until they blurred into one truth. Ditto was out there, somewhere, and Kevin had no way of knowing if each sunrise brought him closer to return or closer to being lost forever. That night, the bed felt like an echo chamber. Kevin stretched his hand across the sheets, his palm flattening against the emptiness where Ditto should have been. He pressed harder, as if he could force the memory of heat back into the cotton. But the silence was merciless, and every whisper from the village pressed deeper into his chest. He whispered into the dark, his voice hoarse. "You promised me. Don't you dare break it." The house gave no answer. Only the wind shifted through the mango tree outside, its leaves brushing together like voices Kevin could not quite understand. The nights grew longer without him. Kevin often found himself lying awake long after the lanterns had burned out, the silence pressing down heavy as a weight. The bed carried only his warmth, the other half cool and unyielding. No matter how he reached across, he would close his eyes, with his body to remember. But memory was a poor substitute for the way Daito's chest had once risen steady beneath his cheek, for the way his arms had anchored him through the night. And so came the dreams. Sometimes they were tender. He would see Daito walking through the door, mud on his boots, fatigue in his eyes, but alive, always alive. In those dreams, Daito's hands were rough but sure, his lips brushing Kevin's hairline in the way he always did before speaking his name. Kevin would wake with his heart racing, reaching into the darkness, whispering, "You're here," only to find the air cold and empty. Other nights, the dreams turned cruel. He saw battlefields smeared with smoke, Daito's figure lost in the haze. He would run toward him, throat raw from shouting his name, only to see him swallowed by the noise of gunfire and the crush of faceless men. Kevin would wake gasping, sweat cold on his skin, tears wetting his temples. The bed felt larger then, like a void that mocked him. In waking hours, longing haunted him like a second shadow. He pressed Daito's shirt to his face until the scent dulled with time, tracing seams with trembling fingers. The dog tag around his neck became more than a keepsake. It was a lifeline. He touched it constantly, pressing the cool metal against his lips, against his chest, as if the rhythm of Daito's heartbeat still lingered there. Sometimes, in the quiet before dawn, he swore he felt it, a ghost of weight beside him, the brush of breath against his temple, the faint warmth of a hand sliding down his spine. His body remembered so vividly that for a moment, he believed. He would whisper into the darkness, voice cracking, "Stay, just stay." But the ghost always dissolved with the first light, and the day returned him to silence. The days bled together until Kevin stopped trying to count them. Morning light, the rhythm of chores, the weight of evening's age carried the same echoing absence. He no longer expected the sound of boots on the porch, the rumble of laughter. In the kitchen, he moved through silence as though it were another body in the house. Then the letter came. It was left on the porch at dusk, slipped into his hands by a trader returning from inland routes. The envelope was different, stiffer, the handwriting sharper, unfamiliar. Kevin's stomach dropped before he even opened it. His hands trembled as he tore at the paper, each second dragging like a blade across his chest. Inside was no flowing script from Daito, no words bent into private tenderness. Instead, the sentences were clipped, official, written in another man's hand. "Daito is alive. He cannot write freely. He asked me to tell you he is safe." The words swam. Kevin sank onto the porch steps, the letter shaking in his grip. Alive. The single word pounded through his skull until tears broke loose, hot and unbidden. His body folded over itself, the relief crashing into him like a wave, sharp and overwhelming. He pressed the page to his chest, against the dog tag that never left his skin, and let himself break open with gratitude. He read the line again, and again, whispering the words aloud as though speaking them would keep them true. Alive. He is alive. When the sun dipped and the lantern was lit, Kevin remained on the porch, the letter clutched tight in his hands. He tilted his face toward the night sky, stars pricking through the indigo, and whispered to the air as though Daito might hear it carried on the wind. "Hold on, I'll wait for you, no matter how long." The village murmured faintly below. Crickets sang in the grass, and the mango tree shifted in the breeze. Kevin sat wrapped in silence, but for the first time in weeks, the silence didn't feel like absence. It felt like waiting. Fragile, yes, but threaded through with hope.
In shadows deep, secret sleep, a whisper starts to bloom. My heart, it aches for love.